What would you want to say to the person who tortured you? If he were in front of you now, what do you say?
I would say something like, aren't you human? Do you have a brother? Do you have a sister? How do you torture people? How can you sleep at night? How do you do it? And you go every day home and you sleep. These people need to be put on trial and be punished, because if we don't do this, this culture of impunity will continue. And we cannot guarantee this will not happen in the future.
The House of Assad is no more. In what once would have been considered unfathomable, one of the most brutal dictatorships of the 20th and 21st centuries has come to an end. The Assad family dynasty ruled over Syria with iron fists for over 50 years. It was a vicious regime that killed and disappeared hundreds of thousands of people with impunity. In November 2024, the government of Bashar Al Assad was toppled in a revolution. I'm Adrian Harewood, and this is In Bed with the Elephant. Someone who knew the Assad regime all too well is Maher Arar. In late September 2002, just a year after the Al-Qaeda-led September 11th attacks on the United States, and in the midst of the so-called war on terror that followed 9/11, Maher Arar, a Syrian-born-McGill University educated engineer, was on his way home to Canada following a family trip to Tunisia. While on a stopover at New York's JFK Airport, Arar was detained by U.S. authorities and held for 12 days. He was then sent secretly on a private plane to Syria through Jordan. Maher Arar would spend a harrowing 10 months and 10 days in some of Syria's most notorious prisons, where he was interrogated and tortured. Following a nationwide campaign led by his wife Monia Mazigh, Arar was released from Syrian detention and returned home to Ottawa in October 2003. A few months later, the Canadian government established a commission of inquiry that examined his case. Finally, in January 2007, the Canadian government officially apologized to Maher Arar and paid him over $10 million in compensation for its complicity in his detention. I spoke to Maher Arar in mid-December 2024, just weeks after the revolution that swept Syria's strongman Bashar Al Assad from power. We discussed the political earthquake occurring in Syria, his memories of growing up during the Assad dictatorship, his time in the Syrian gulag, and his hopes for the Syrian people. Here's our conversation. Maher, welcome.
Thank you, Adrian, for inviting me to your podcast.
I want you to tell us what the last couple of weeks, or the last, 2 weeks, have been like for you. What are some things that have been going through your mind?
A lot of mixed emotions, one of excitement, one of happiness, remembrance, one that is also overwhelming. I feel I'm overwhelmed by what happened because it all happened within about 10 to 11 days. So the Assad's regime collapsed that fast. I was expecting his regime to collapse, but in 11 days. So that kind of, it's fascinating, but it's also emotionally draining to try to read about everything right now and try to follow the news. For me, what is more important right now is just to follow the news of those people who lost their loved ones, whether under torture or those who were killed by their regime outside the law. I'm still trying to make sense of what has happened. It's very, very difficult. I also have this emotion of what's next. A lot of questions, a lot of question marks, a lot of feelings all mixed together.
You say that you were expecting the regime to collapse, but were you expecting it to collapse at this moment? When were you expecting it to collapse?
I don't have the crystal ball, but I knew, to be honest with you, what's been happening in Gaza and the consequences. Iran and Hezbollah, the closest allies of the Syrian regime, have been weakened, was a clear indicator that sooner or later the Assad regime would collapse, sooner than people expect. I did not expect it to happen this year. I was more like thinking a year or two from now.
When you see these images of really tens of thousands of prisoners leaving the Syrian gulag, some of them have been imprisoned for decades, finally seeing light. When you see people walking around joyous in the streets of Damascus, families honking horns and clearly, embracing friends and family members, just expressing their joy. Again, like what was going through your mind when you're seeing these things happening that, few people could scarcely have imagined a month ago?
It was that of a joy first, but at the same time, the bleeding and the bruises and the cuts from what happened in Syria are far, far beyond the 5,000 or 10,000 people who were released. So I'm someone who think deeply about those things for two reasons: because of what happened to me, but also because that's always been my personality and how I was brought up. So yes, I join in celebrating, but at the same time, I think about the mothers and the fathers and the brothers who lost their siblings. And it's not 5,000 or 10,000. We're talking about, at the most conservative estimate, it's like 500,000 Syrians were slaughtered by the Assad regime. And now we're hearing more news about the ones who were disappeared. It's becoming clear that they have been killed and buried. So for me, there's this feeling of joy and happiness, and I feel happy for all the mothers and the fathers who have seen their kids being released. But at the same time, like the massacres, the war crimes on industrial scale, that gives me a little bit of a pause. I do not want to have a complete celebration because I would be hurting their feelings. I could understand why a mother who has lost few of her sons and daughters, I don't see her celebrating. So why should I celebrate fully?
The numbers, as you said, are staggering.
Yes.
Hundreds of thousands, people, 500,000 people killed in the last 13 years.
Yes.
During the civil war. Hundreds of thousands disappeared.
Yes.
5 million Syrians have left the country.
Yes.
23 million Syrians have been displaced.
Can you imagine? I don't know if anything else happened during this even past century. Maybe we could point out to what happened during the two wars, World War wars, but in a single war, it's just unimaginable for me. I don't think we talk about it enough. It's just beyond imagination.
Let's talk about it because you're 54 years old. Hafez Al Assad, Bashar Al Assad's father, came to power in March of 1971. You were 6 months old at that time. For most of your life, you've lived under this regime for some 53 years.
Yes.
And this is a regime that ruled by terrorizing the population. Give us a sense of what it was like to live, day to day under the brutality, the iron fist of this regime. What was it like living in?
So I left Syria when I was 17 years old. So I could probably remember anything between the age of 10 years old to maybe 17. One expression that my father always reminded me of to be careful, he always said to me, walls have ears. What this refers to is your neighbor could be a spy for the government, your colleague at work, your relative even. I can tell you countless stories where sometimes the mother is surprised her son is a spy for the government or an agent, undercover agent for the government, because they're supposed to keep it secret. So I remember as an average citizen, I would never trust any other citizen.
Never. Like I can't talk about politics. I can't make a joke. I can't even be seen to be religious. I remember when I actually started praying. I remember it vividly. And how old were you?
I think I was 14. And
what caused you to start praying?
It's an important incident. I lost a dear friend of mine He was in a swimming pool. Something happened and he died. And I remember a cousin of mine who was religious, and he found me sad one day, and he asked me why. I explained to him why. Then he started talking to me about the hereafter and the importance of prayer and all of this. So I started praying when I was 14. After a few months, I gave up. But then when I came to Canada, a voice came back to me and said, maybe now it's about time again to go back and start praying.
You say you left the country at the age of 17. What caused you to end up leaving the country?
Every Syrian at an early age is frightened of going to the military and serve the country. It's not because they don't want it. It's because once you go to the army, you're humiliated almost on a daily basis. They almost pay you nothing. At that time, when I was there, the law says you have to serve a maximum of 2.5 years. But there's really no limit. You could be in there for 5 years. I remember one of my brothers served about 4.5 years in Lebanon. People hated being recruited in the army. So the way out is to really apply for a special exemption if you're continuing your study, so you could every year renew, and this way you could escape or you could delay it. The atmosphere and the environment and the living doesn't give you any hope. So for me, escaping to Canada was the only option for me to start dreaming.
You say you escaped.
It is an escape. Some people do it informally, but I was lucky enough for my dad. He knew someone who knew someone who knew someone, but not everyone has this privilege. Basically, it works through bribes, You have no choice. But some people do escape, actually, physically through the borders to Lebanon and to Turkey, and they escape the country.
And when you arrived in Montreal at 17, did you feel different? Did you feel the difference from being in Syria? Like, how different was it?
I was so excited. I was lucky enough, my brothers took care of me since I was a kid. So I would have this private instructor at home for English and so on. I knew what I wanted to do in life. My studies was my priority. When I looked around at my brothers, none of them pursued their higher education, right? So I felt it's like a family obligation on me to go to university, right? So this added pressure maybe helped.
You come here with the idea that you're not going back. You plan to make a life in this country. There was no thought of returning to Syria?
Of course. You see, military service is a nightmare. It was always on my head. It was always in my imagination. That explains why when I was interviewed by American officials and they asked me, what are you worried about if we were to return to Syria? I said, military service. And so it was constantly on my mind because remember, 4 of my brothers served in the military, and I can spend hours telling you what kind of horrible stories they had told us, right? So it was constantly on my mind.
So fast forward to 2002, September 2002, you have been on holiday. Mm-hmm. You were in Tunisia, visiting your wife Monia's family.
Yes.
You're on your way back home, going to Montreal. There's a stopover in New York City at JFK airport, and you're detained. Did you have any idea what was going on?
At the beginning, I was a little bit surprised because I had worked in the States. I actually had moved to Boston. And I've traveled to at least 15, maybe even more states with no issue. And I traveled back to Canada, from Canada back to the States. So I had no issue whatsoever. No questioning, not even one time. Except maybe after 9/11. Now I know more about why, but overall it was a pleasant experience. So that was a surprise. And what even was more surprising in the way I was treated. As a Canadian, I was really treated from the first second they stopped me until the time they put me on a private jet and sent me to Jordan. I was surprised how I was treated.
How were you treated?
I mean, I was always treated like a criminal, as if my Canadian citizenship did not matter. I was treated more like a Syrian terrorist, not a Canadian terrorist, you know?
A foreigner. You were an alien.
Yes, exactly.
An enemy alien.
In fact, that's what they said in the documents they gave. I was considered an alien, and it was rather a shock because I actually had good things to think about the U.S. as a country. But this treatment at the airport just put things upside down for me.
So when you're being questioned, when did you realize that things were kind of going sideways? Like, what kind of questions were they asking you?
I initially thought it was a mistaken identity, or maybe because of 9/11, I am a Muslim or whatever. I don't recall when exactly, but at some point I had not the customs, but other people come interview me. I forgot if they were part of the FBI, but they were in civilian clothes. And then they started talking to me about some of the people I knew. And that's when I started like thinking, oh my God, so it's bigger than I thought. So I was just asking myself questions. That's when I realized they had so much information that it's not a routine questioning. It's more like there's some kind of a bigger investigation going on.
They knew stuff about you. They knew about stuff, like they knew about some of your friendship or relationship, people that you'd encountered.
Yes, I mean, it's not a secret. I've said it many times. It's well now and well-publicized case. They assigned me about Abdullah al-Malki, Abdullah al-Mahati, and many other people. I don't even remember. They mentioned a lot of names, most of whom I did not know. They kept telling me I was not a suspect and they would let me go on the next plane to Montreal. Right?
So your expectation is after all of this, I'm going home. And then they start asking you about Al-Qaeda? Were they asking you about Al-Qaeda in New York?
They did, of course, but I don't remember the full details. They did, of course, ask me about my political views. They asked me about suicide bombings in Palestine. I basically don't lie about those things. So it's my opinion. I live in a free country.
You don't lie about what?
About saying something that I don't believe in. But it became clear that it was not a routine interrogation or questioning. They chained and shackled me at the end of the day. They sent me to INS detention center by the airport. And another team came next day and they interrogated me and then eventually sent me to the Metropolitan Detention Center.
So you're at the Metropolitan Detention Center.
And I kept saying, I want a lawyer. They ignore me.
So you're unable to contact your family?
Yes, they wouldn't allow me.
Right. And then you find yourself on a plane? Is it just one morning? You're just carted off into...
3 in the morning. They woke me up. They said, get up. And I was so disoriented. I didn't know what was happening. They would not tell me where we were going. But obviously, from the way I was treated, strip search and all of this, again, they made me wear a brown suit instead of an orange one. And they took me in the car, many cars, actually, not just one car. I was treated like the North American version of Bin Laden, maybe, or something. So I was actually, that made me a little bit more disoriented. So I started thinking, am I that important? Like, why are they...
But I'm trying to understand that. I'm trying to, like, what's going on in your head? This is like out of Kafka. Like, this is just...
It is.
It's nuts. It's
crazy.
Nuts.
And they did not blindfold me, if I recall. So I was able to see the police cars and the civilian cars. And that reminded me of the bodyguards and of the Assad regime, the cars, and what they call them, convoy?
Security detail or convoy?
Security detail.
Right.
I was becoming more and more disoriented. I couldn't make sense of what was going on. They didn't tell me anything at all. And then we arrived at a place that seemed like an airport. That's when I felt I was being sent to Syria. That was the first indication.
You felt like you were...
Of course, because why would they put me in an airport like that? It seemed like not a big airport, right? So I said, oh my God, they're sending me.
Which just must be terrifying. Like you left at 17 to escape this regime.
Yes.
And now they're sending you back.
And that was frightening. That's when I became certain they were sending me back to Syria. I didn't know the details about me being sent to Jordan first, but basically I knew there was something. Either when I was leaving the detention center or maybe when they put me in the plane that they gave me the reason why, something like that. So they gave me this multi-page document where, we accuse you of being an Al-Qaeda agent or you're not allowed to be on U.S. soil or something like this.
So you're on this plane on its way to Jordan. lands in Jordan.
Mm-hmm.
You stay there for
A day.
a day.
Yeah.
And then it's off to Damascus.
Mm-hmm.
And so you weren't blindfolded.
When the plane arrived in Jordan, I overheard them talking about Jordan. So I knew it landed in Jordan. I was relating my fear to one of the officers of being sent to Syria. And he said, oh, why don't talk to the Jordanians? Maybe they can keep you in Jordan, something like this. They opened the door. It's a private jet. Then a team of Jordanian agents was waiting for me at the bottom of the stairs. I don't remember how many, but maybe 4 or 5. And the minute I arrived at the bottom of the plane, they blindfolded me right away. And then they took me in the car and they took me to the detention center. I was interrogated in Jordan briefly.
Yeah.
They took my the 10 fingerprints, I guess. But it was not an extensive investigation.
And so when you realize that you've actually crossed the border...
I think, to be honest with you, I think the Jordanians knew I was the wrong guy.
What tells you that?
The interrogation was, if you recall, one of the CIA agents described the CIA-run rendition program, as follows. He said, if we wanted for someone to disappear, you send him to Egypt. If you wanted someone to be well interrogated, you send them to Jordan. If you wanted someone to be tortured, you send them to Syria.
This is Bayer, I think, the
exactly.
Official.
Exactly.
CIA official.
And that's exactly very accurate because Jordanian investigators have a lot more experience. They were trained by the CIA. The others, they depend more on beating and torture, whereas the Jordanians depend more on the more psychological techniques. It doesn't mean they don't use torture, physical. But I felt he was not convinced. I felt the guy was not interested in me, basically. Mm-hmm.
So you traveled by car from Jordan to Syria.
Yeah.
When did you realize you were in Damascus? Like, when did you realize that you were...
They blindfolded me and they made me bend my head, so I couldn't see anything. But I was overhearing what they were saying. So after they took me, maybe an hour or so later, maybe more, I could tell we were at the border crossing. And I could overhear Jordanians talking to the Syrians and all of this. So I was transferred to another car. And then a few hours later, I was in Damascus.
And you're taken where?
I don't know. When they removed the blindfold, I found myself into an office, maybe 10 feet by 10 feet, something like that. They wouldn't tell me what it is or what it is or where I was. But I learned later it was the Palestine branch of the military intelligence.
You're in this room. What are they asking you? What's happening?
If I recall, it was not like an interrogation per se, but they took my personal belongings and then they put me in an empty room for a little while and the routine thing. They made me go naked and they examined everything in my body, like to make sure I hadn't. So it's kind of humiliation. I don't recall if there was any beating that first day. I don't remember, but it was just I was going through the routine.
In recent days, we've been hearing about what a horror show these prisons in Syria are. We're hearing about it. We're seeing it. We're seeing images of it. What was it like for you to kind of enter into this cell for the first time? So 2 hours later, after they put me in this room, they took me downstairs. They took me to the basement. There were few solitary confinement cells on the right, on the left. In the middle, there was a toilet. And I was number 2. So you're known by a number. Once you're there, you're just a number. And it was a very, very tiny cell. I haven't been able to find it, by the way. I looked at all the available video footage. It's not discovered yet, I think. So people, whatever they label on the video as Palestine branch, and I think it has to do with the Palestine branch being big, which means under each building there is cells. But I did find the one at the Sidnaya prison. It was shown in one of the videos. And actually, whatever they showed so far from the Palestine branch looks to me like 5-star to what I was kept in. As awful as they may look on the video. But this tells me were we kept in a secretive Palestine
branch building? Was it dedicated to those suspects who were rendered? I don't know the answer to this, but it's very telling.
You say it was tiny. How tiny?
It was 3 feet wide maybe and 7 feet deep. And maybe high, it's probably 8 feet high, something like that. It's underground, it's dark.
So I can't even imagine. Like they're putting you in the cell, and you're seeing that. You're saying, "What is going on?" Like I can't. I'm trying to imagine like how one would respond in that situation where a person is putting you somewhere where you're expected to exist.
Yeah,
and it's 3 feet by 6 feet by 7 or 8 feet.
It's crazy. It's that's why I call it the coffin. Even in Syria now they call it tabut, which is mean coffin. And there were quite a few. Like on my side, I think there were 5 all in all, 5 facing it, and on the other side there were another 10, like 5 and 5. And in the middle there's toilet that we would share every once they allowed us to go out for a toilet. But honestly, when they opened the door for me and the guy with his hand said, "Go in," I thought I was going to be kept there for a day or 2 or something like that. I thought naively that was part of the pressure tactics to make me confess, right? But I ended up staying in that place for 10 months and 10 days. I don't know how I survived. To be honest, it's still a miracle for me. How I survived this, I don't know. I just don't have an answer. I don't have an answer.
What were you doing with yourself that first day? Like, what are you?
Oh,
how do you keep yourself occupied? Like, what are you thinking about? What are you doing?
The first few days were the toughest because not only you're there, but you could be taken out for interrogation any second. So whenever I heard footsteps coming, I was scared. So not only you're suffering from the detention conditions, but you're also scared that they would take you next and beat you and interrogate you, right? But believe it or not, that cell, because of the beatings upstairs in the interrogation rooms, it became actually paradise for me over time. I wanted to stay in that cell and not being taken to the interrogation rooms. So as awful as it is, as tiny as it is, as bad as it is, you would prefer to stay in there and not meet the interrogators. It's kind of a refuge.
It's total darkness.
It is total darkness. There's a hole in the ceiling, small hole, from which a little bit of light came in, but it's total darkness, yes.
What does it smell like?
Bad, all the time. The rats everywhere above. The rats would sneak in sometimes inside. The only people who would understand is the people who have been in it. It's just tough. It's hard to explain.
And the sound?
I'm glad there was sound. Even the jailers, because without sound, how do you keep stimulated? Sometimes the sound is bad. You hear people being tortured. What's the most awful thing is behind me, I think, there was a communal cell for women. And we would hear them sometimes complaining to the guards. And I would hear baby crying. So imagine you're suffering from the conditions and the beatings and everything, but at the same time you suffer more when you hear a baby crying. It's a compounded kind of suffering.
I've been watching, like as many people have, videos of former prisoners in this gulag. And there was an interview with, I think he's quite a famous cultural figure, a gentleman. And he was talking about the fact that on one occasion while he was in prison, he was asked by a guard to come to a cell where there was a young woman and her son. Her son might have been about 5 or 6. And the guard had wanted him to go there in order to entertain the son because he knew that this man was a cultured man and he hoped that he would maybe sing the boy a song or some poetry. Just to kind of brighten the young boy's day, because the boy was detained also. The boy was in this prison and had been for a long time.
Is it the guard who asked?
Yeah, the guard asked, so that the guard actually asked this
guard
man.
Is an angel.
Yeah, he asked this man to do this because he was so disturbed. The gentleman tries to tell the boy about a bird. And he realizes that the boy doesn't know what a bird is because he's never been outside. He
yes.
starts asking the boy about a tree, right? He wants to tell a poem about a tree, but he realizes that the boy doesn't know what a tree is.
Yes, I believe
He starts talking about all these things about animals, and he realizes that this boy is almost like a blank slate because he had received no stimulation in his life. He'd spent his entire time
and I can relate to this, maybe not in the same way, but I have no doubt this is a true story. When your senses are not stimulated, your cognitive abilities decline. This has been proven scientifically. That's why I said the stimulation by hearing guards talking or whatever is more beneficial than harmful, because you're surrounded by this four walls, tiny cell, like in a tiny cell. Your sensory faculties, they get damaged. I remember when I eventually started getting visits from the counselor, Canadian counselor. I, by then, was detained for, 7 months maybe. It would take me a while, like a few seconds, to understand what he's asking me or the conversation. So there's delay, the processing delay, I call it as an engineer, but maybe it has another medical term. The cognitive abilities get damaged. For example, since then, I don't smell, my smelling faculty or my smelling, it's not the same. I don't smell as good as before, right? But even the cognitive abilities decline. That may explain why the UN considers solitary confinement is torture if the detainee is kept in there more than 3 days, I think. This is based on latest research in the field. So yeah, if you want to torture someone, you don't even have to beat them. You just put them in a solitary confinement for weeks and months on end and even years. There are people who have been in those places for years, believe it or not.
Decades.
Yes, it's just unbelievable. Adrian, I wish in the next 2025 dictionary, we see new words being invented in English to describe the Assad regime's brutality. I don't think those words are appropriate. Out of all the Arab regimes, the Assad regime is the most brutal ever. We were all in survival mode. We were all thinking, I could be next tomorrow. Because during my stay, there are 3 people who perished under torture.
How do you keep yourself sane? What did you do to keep yourself sharp?
Me, I found I kept my mind preoccupied with inventing new mathematical problems in my head. But it was not working all the time. I had a lot of anxiety. I started screaming sometimes. But I discovered that each detainee found their own way. To this day, I don't believe I was able to stay that long in that cell. And knowing that other people were kept there for longer, it's just beyond me.
It's not just the isolation that you had to endure. It's not just this
The uncertainty. See, the uncertainty is the biggest thing. See, if you're detained in Canada, right, you get a lawyer visit, someone will tell you, okay, there is a court appearance next week. There's your wife will come visit you. You're like, something is happening,
And that you're entitled to things. There, am I going to be dead tomorrow? Am I going to be dead tonight? Nothing, like pretty much nothing, right? To say it bluntly, I think my Canadian citizenship saved me in some way, to a certain extent. How? How so?
I think they were paying attention. My wife made all the buzz about, what's happening. There was some movement later from some politicians. I'm saying this because imagine a Syrian who has no other foreign citizenship. It's worse. Despite the awfulness of my treatment and everything, take my case and multiply it by even 10 times. And there are people who suffered 10 times or even more than me in Syria. And for years on end, not just a year, right?
Your Canadian citizenship, though, did not protect you or did not prevent you from being physically tortured.
Yes, correct. Even then, I think if I did not have Canadian citizenship, I think it would have been much worse.
But what they did to you was pretty bad.
It is bad.
They used a cable on your palm.
That is correct. But Adrian, I'm not trying to minimize what they did to me. I want people to know I would feel guilty if I don't speak for others. So there are people who have been tortured much more than me. And those people don't have a Canadian citizenship. I've heard stories I don't want to mention here, but it could be much worse than this. And this is just to show that the Assad regime is very brutal, beyond imagination, beyond what people could imagine.
What do these people who have finally escaped this gulag, what do they need right now? Like, knowing what you know, given when you think about your own experience going through that, you've been out of this prison for some 22 years now, but you're still dealing with the effects of being there. So what do these tens of thousands of people who've been through this brutal, harrowing experience, what do they need right now?
Two things. They need a specialist, especially, to listen to them, and they need accountability and justice.
What does that mean? What does accountability and justice mean? What does it look like?
They need to see the people who did this to them held accountable, put on trials. That's part of their recovery. That's part of rehabilitation. I don't speak for everyone, but people are looking forward to getting justice, and it must be a priority for the current government, because this is not a few thousand people being killed or 100 people. Like, I'm talking about industrial scale war crimes. Some families I've heard, they lost 7 or 8 members of their family, right? It's horrendous. It's beyond imagination. For me, priority right now is for accountability and justice. I am seeing moms and dads who are not celebrating the victory because they need to see accountability and justice. My fear is that politics and geopolitics will prevent those victims and their families to get justice.
So what does that justice and accountability look like? What's the process that would produce justice and accountability for you and for those people?
I would want to see the torturers and the people who killed civilians and tortured them be first caught, detained in a temporary detention center, and then put on trial, give them fair representation, give them access to lawyers, and let the court decide what to do with them. It's a priority. This can't wait. I understand the challenges that are there, but the families of the victims are the only ones who can decide whether they forgive this person or not. It's not the government's responsibility. The government has to just apply the law here. And believe it or not, in Syrian law, even existing Syrian law that the Assad regime has never, it's actually punishable by Syrian law to torture someone and to kill them, right? So just let the existing law be applied to them. That's all.
What would you want to say to the person who tortured you? If he were in front of you now, what do you say?
I would say something like, aren't you human? Do you have a brother? Do you have a sister? How do you torture people? How can you sleep at night? How do you do it? I just can't even torture an animal. Like, how do you do it? How do you do it? And you go every day home and you sleep. These people need to be put on trial and be punished, because if we don't do this, this culture of impunity will continue. And we cannot guarantee this will not happen in the future.
This is a difficult question, but is justice seeing them in Sednaya prison? Is justice seeing the torturers in those cells, in those places?
Actually, Sednaya prison is a 5-star hotel compared to the other detention centers. So I would not want these people to go through what I went through or the detainees went through. I would not mistreat them. I would not keep them in miserable conditions, but I would have them placed in a detention center until there are trials, and then the trials will decide and the judge will decide how long they'll go to prison for. You can't just forgive someone who's killed hundreds of people. You just can't. It's against every single human being thing. It's just against logic.
It's not vengeance.
It's not vengeance. I'm not saying this for myself, Adrian. I am watching, and I've watched over the years, how many mothers wept. Adrian, what happened is beyond any human being imagination. And that's why the response has to be firm. I'm not talking about the people who supported Assad verbally or anything. The actual torturers, the actual people who committed crimes, those people need to be held to account. It's not about vengeance, no. It's about making sure justice is served and that this serves as the deterrent for people in the future. Go after the main criminals. For those, we have evidence, video evidence. There's a lot of video evidence out there. And there are a lot of known criminals. And then as a second phase for the people who are complicit to also open an investigation and see what their involvement is. I'm not a judicial expert on this, but I do see holding the big criminals at least accountable very quickly.
Is there room for a kind of truth and reconciliation process, a process that we've seen in places like South Africa?
I think this will happen over time. The immediate response should be to punish those who committed crimes against the Syrian people. I keep repeating, you can't convince a mom to accept reconciliation if the same maybe torturer or the same criminal killed 8 or 9 of her kids or brothers. You just can't do it. It's not human. People need to know that if you commit crime like torture and kill civilians, there's a consequence for that.
For 20 years, you were kind of telling your story in the wilderness. You were telling people this story that in many ways wasn't being affirmed, if you understand what I mean. Right? Like you were telling the story, but it was like you were kind of a lone wolf saying, this is happening. But it's almost only now that people are really believing what you've been saying for 20 years. And I've been thinking, what does that feel like? Like that must have been hard. All that time you're saying people, and that people, they kind of believe you, but it's like it's only now that they're able to see, okay.
Yeah, it's kind of a vindication. Well, I was not the only Syrian or Canadian who was tortured there. We know of other stories. And there were 2 inquiries in Canada about this. But I agree with you. What do they say? A picture is worth 1,000 words. So imagine, what will a video be? Is it 1 million words? Is it 1 billion words? The thing is, people can watch how awful they are, but even on the video, they will not get a complete picture of what it is. They have to go there, smell things, feel the temperatures, feel everything.
You have lived for 37 years outside of Syria, save for that 10-month, horrific time, 10 months that you were in Syria in 2002, 2003. Would you ever consider going back?
I've been thinking about it recently. There's some kind of an urge in me to join them and celebrate. I came to Canada in 1987. In the mid-90s, I had a strange inner feeling. I don't want to call it make it sound like it's like a revelation or anything, but something strange happened. It was while I was awake, I was not even sleeping. Something strong feeling came to me. I still cannot explain it until today. I felt like I was going to come back to Syria, but not be able to visit my home or my friends. So that was constantly on my mind. This did happen actually, right? So I was sent there. I didn't see my friends. Even when I left, I left the detention center, went to the counselor's house, and then we left to the airport same day, right? So coming back to Syria, I would want to go back and visit. Do I feel safe yet? I don't feel 100% safe yet for many, many reasons. But it is really on my mind. It is really on my mind.
Maher, thanks so much.
Thank you.
You've been listening to In Bed with the Elephant on Ricochet Media. Producer and sound engineer, Dave Sarazin. Executive producers, Ethan Cox and Andrea Houston. Music by Parker Harewood. Graphics, Connor Killoran. I'm Adrian Harewood. I'll talk to you next time.